Aviation Commission's public workshop now. Let's see. Who else is here that we're going to do? Okay.
Over there.
We have city staff, Advar Sites. Then we have Mr. Jordan Fell, Deputy Director for City of Phoenix Airport. Would you like to say a few words?
Happy to be here.
Okay. With that, we're going to start with the meeting topics, which will be done by David.
You have any new questions? My name is David Dwarone, and we're pleased to have you here, even though you're just a handful. It's just as important if you had only one person out there. Why am I picked to be the moderator tonight? And I'll tell you that I'm a little bit unusual in that I have 5 connections to this airport. Number one is I've been a resident of Tempe since 1959. Number two, I have flown general, that is light aircraft, in and out of Sky Harbor. Number three, I was an aircraft commander in the Air Force and flew military aircraft in and out of Sky Harbor. Number four, I worked in the Phoenix Sky Harbor Tower in air traffic control. Number five, I was a captain for Delta Airlines, and I flew airliners in and out of Sky Harbor. So I know a little bit about a lot of stuff, so that's why I'm sitting here. We have 3 topics on the agenda tonight, and the first one regards the IGA. And IGA, I always thought was a grocery store, but it turns out it means Intergovernmental Agreement. And we have a couple of experts on the IGA. If anybody gives me a hand signal, I can let them talk. Jordan?
Thank you. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about the IGA, but just in general, it's been in place now for several years, and the gist of it is the city of Phoenix is required to maintain noise monitors throughout the community. We share that information with residents, Tempe staff regularly. The information is accessible online. The IGA also provides for an equalization requirement, meaning that the flows of traffic generally averaged out over a year are about 50-50. And of course, the 4 DME compliance is the other kind of main component of the intergovernmental agreement.
Can everybody hear him all right? Okay. All right, we put up the slide here of the text that describes the IGA. And the reason why the IGA is kind of a puzzle, at least it was to me, is it's an agreement only for departures. So that means nothing that we have been dealing with directly in this commission is involved with the arrivals. It's strictly the departures. So that cuts down the amount of involvement in half. And we have questions that have been submitted on the website, and we invited questions tonight, but everybody was happy with the questions already submitted, so we'll stick with those. And the first topic is the IGA itself. Jordan has kindly given us the overview of it. There's a couple of things that have been asked in the questionnaires about talking about why the different runways, equalization, the winds, which runways, which directions, what considerations are given for the routes taken. And what I can tell you is that there are procedures that have been published primarily for the airlines. The same procedures are available to the military, but they're not bound by them. And the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport is a joint use airport. The city of Phoenix could not afford that airport without the help of the military. The military spending makes a dent in the budget, so they have to have them, and there are other requirements that put the National Guard there as well. So what the military does is is outside of the scope of whatever this committee would be talking about, or whatever the FAA or the city would be talking about, unless it has to do with safety. The departures to the west were the subject of a lawsuit in Phoenix, specifically the old neighborhood, which I can't remember the name of. Well, the historical area, they have another name for it. Encanto neighborhood. And that lawsuit raised a lot of awareness for people for the Tempe side of operations at Sky Harbor, but that lawsuit really had nothing to do with the Tempe side of the airport. So you have to keep that in mind. There's a question that's been asked about the equalization use of the runways. The tower cab, that is the top of that tall building that sits in the middle of the airport, has meters, Loasis meters and various meters that are all around the airport measuring wind, and they can check wind trends as well as microbursts. And they are restricted by the certification of the aircraft for a 10-knot tailwind. And 10 knots is right on the ragged edge. If somebody's got a 10-knot tailwind on the meter, every once in a while the needle will probably bump 11. So you'll have the guys, whoever the cab chief, the tower chief is, will probably call it and say switch ends. And that's when they turn the airport around, it's called. They're not really turning the airport around. What they're doing is changing the direction of landing and takeoffs. And it's a benefit to us here in Tempe in the valley that the winds are fairly predictable. And so if we take a look at another slide here, if it works. Okay, that's the old IGA for departures, and it's 94 by the date, and as I am told, it's not in use at the present time. And we have the riverbed outlined on this particular slide. And if you take a look, you can see by the purple lines what the aircraft tracks have been left. That big star up near the top center of the picture is the 4 DME fix. Now, DME means distance measuring equipment, and if you're medical, I know that means durable medical equipment. You just have to get away from it. And that point is measured with a device on the airplanes in the old days, which was called DME. Now they're using RNAV to find the same place. RNAV can locate any spot, and they call this one 4DME, so that's why it's there. You can see by the tracks that the procedure was emphasized enough that the people flying the airplanes have taken it seriously. And you can see from those runways, the vast majority of the departures go over that 4DME point. Here are some deviations, the bright red lines, and sometimes there might be weather, sometimes there might be traffic, there's all kinds of things that might be involved, and they specifically mention on this slide that the KC-135s deviated. Once again, those are military aircraft, so they are enabled to deviate. Now, this is the enforcement slide. Now, it is kind of a big deal that if somebody does not comply with an ATC instruction, then the pilot in command of that aircraft is subject to not a citation exactly, but an action. And so that's very serious, and people tend to shy away from it, but it is a tool that is available. And the man that can describe that is busy right now. So Jordan, can you tell us about enforcement?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So as you indicated, the performance or conformance today is about as good as it's ever been, at around 99% plus. But as you point out, there are the occasional violators. We send all of the airlines a synopsis of the conformance for the month, but the airlines that do violate, and you can see some of them are literally at 100%. The ones that aren't, we send a letter similar to this, ask them to comply, remind them of their obligation, and I won't tell you that every single one is responded to, but we do get the occasional, we understand it was a weather event or some other special circumstance. So that is the day-to-day implementation of the compliance standard.
Okay, now let's jump from the IGA for a moment to the second set of questions talking about arrival operations. Arrival operations, once again, are outside of the traditional agreement. So that means that what happens on arrivals is what has been traditionally done, or the FAA has determined, or the carriers have requested, and it really has had very little input from the communities. So let's see what we have for a slide here. These are some old things. This is a slide talking about the split. That's worth looking at. You can see that on the top picture, the top depiction, that there are more departures to the west during the day, and that's primarily into the evening hours, so about midday when the direction of the airport changes. And the lower slide shows that towards evening, then the departures start going to the east, and that will continue into the early morning hours until the sun comes up and changes the direction of the wind. Okay, arrivals. Now you'll notice there's a pink line that represents the 101, and it's about 3/4 of the way to the right side of the slide. That's the 101, and the 4DME is just about on top of that point. And you can tell by the tracks of these departures that airplanes stay headed for the 4DME point about halfway there, and then they start going different directions. One of the reasons is that they have a waypoint. The name of the waypoint's not important. If you know what it is, then you'll know what I'm talking about. They have a waypoint that's a flyover waypoint, but if they're using RNAV and they have coupled the autopilot, the RNAV doesn't go directly to that point because it's got another direction afterwards, and so it cuts the corner. So a lot of what you see here is the RNAV on the airplane making a rounded curve instead of a sharp angle at a particular point. And some of those are people that are flying not in a big group, they're by themselves, and they say, okay, there's a chance we can go direct. And TRACON is tasked with aircraft safety and efficiency. So if it's efficient and it's safe, then they're allowed to give that shortcut to the pilot, to the crew. And then there is another situation where if you have a lot of departures and one in the back is starting to catch up to one in the front, then you're going to end up with two airplanes too close together. Then they are required to get the aircraft in trail on a different heading so as to avoid a potential collision. So the arrivals are much the same way. If you looked at a bigger picture than this, this shows the south line. That's this line here of traffic coming in over South Mountain for arrival into Phoenix. And one of the tricks that TRACON uses is by having the airplanes arriving all coming in like that, and then airplanes coming from the east coming in a row. If they see a gap in either one of the lines, then they can figure out by their experience how to fit another airplane into those gaps. And so that sometimes means they have to turn a little bit different than what the charts may say. Anything you gentlemen want to add? Anybody on the commission want to add anything? The third topic is South Tempe, and I'll bring it up, but I want to ask by a raised show of hands, is anybody here in the audience from in South Tempe down where they have airplanes flying over the top of them? Okay.
Mr. Gordon, Commissioner.
Oh, right here. Well, good. All right. You're the expert on South Tempe, so I may ask you a question or two here. The question of South Tempe is one of primarily perception. If you perceive the noise, then it's a nuisance. If you perceive the aircraft overhead and it's annoying, then that's the nuisance factor. The fact is, the airplanes have to fly someplace, and South Mountain has been chosen as a way to not be over neighborhoods. So that's the rationale that was originally used. It's far enough out so that the airplanes turning can make it around to that course, but not so far out as to take them way out of their way. So aircraft taking off towards the east from Sky Harbor, heading to Los Angeles, San Diego, or points in that direction, will frequently make the turn over South Mountain climbing. And climbing is when they're using the most power. That's making the most noise. But they're also gaining altitude, and the further they get away from the ground, the less of that noise is going to reach the ground. So I'm going to throw it over to Gordon. What can you say about South Tempe?
What we've noticed in South Tempe when the changes came about is everything was cool around Elliott and McClintock. That's an area I live in. And everything moved about a mile south. And that made a big difference as far as noise goes. People living on that corridor were hearing a lot more noise. And then, of course, on arrivals at night, you can stand out in the backyard and see them coming over your house.
So the other side of that, of course, is the noise went to his neighborhood, but somebody else got relief. So there's always going to be trade-offs. All right, let's.
Can you answer then a little bit? Sorry, a little bit of clarification with the technology and the narrowing of the paths. I think that's some of what South Tempe had noticed also, from the wider paths to the narrowing paths and the technology. Can you like clarify that for some of the residents?
Sure. With the RNAV coming into common use in aircraft, that's area navigation, RNAV. It is much more precise than the older systems, and if it's being plugged into the autopilot, then the airplane can fly within 50 feet of a particular line, and the military can do even closer than that. They're within about 5 feet. The old procedure, the one that I started out with, was come around to a heading. Well, if you turned really sharp, that heading would put you over the north part of South Mountain, and if you turned in a very shallow turn, it would put you over the south side of South Mountain. And they wanted people to be in one area. So this is true of almost all the procedures that Sky Harbor has now. RNAV makes the navigation more condensed, more tightly packed. So you will see the traffic being more consistent. The exception to that is when the controllers need or want to move the airplanes off of the RNAV. And the other one is on arrivals, if somebody is coming in and there's not much traffic and they say, quote, we have the airport in sight, then the controller has the option of giving that aircraft cleared for visual. Now, some airports, I'll quote Los Angeles, will say, we'll call you about 3 miles out. They won't say cleared for landing, not cleared for visual, and those people will probably be following the ILS into Los Angeles. When you think about it, all the arrivals from the east into LA go over one of the most densely populated areas in the western United States. Now, we're not any slackers around here. Did you know that Phoenix, the Phoenix area, is now the 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States? 5th. So we're not too far behind. We've got a lot of people living in the area where the airport is. But at the same time, people are very happy using the airport, so it's a balancing act.
Can I ask you to also clarify why the airlines and aircraft have to hit a certain point. I'm going to ask it from a citizen's point of view. Why are they going here? Why aren't they going everywhere? Don't they have certain markers that they have to meet, or when they register their flights? And how do they come about the path that they take?
When a clearance is delivered to an IFR airplane, they will give them a initial set of instructions. They'll say something like, and I'm going to pull this out of my memory, ABC flight, you're cleared to Los Angeles via the such and such departure to such and such, and then direct or as filed. That they don't read off the whole thing. Back in the 1950s and the 1960s, they in fact used to read it the whole thing off step by step because there were very few IFR operations. Well, now all air carrier operations are IFR. Even if the weather is crystal clear, they all file the instrument flight rules. And yes, there are points along the departure, and if they were to just go and follow them exactly as the clearance dictates, then that's a possibility. And some of these blue lines are just that. But there is an incentive, especially for the folks at Southwest, to cut the flight time below published. In other words, if they're given an hour and 10 minutes to get to LA, if they can make it in an hour, they get credit for that 10 minutes. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know that it works. So if they can find shortcuts anywhere along the way, they have incentive to do that. So if they take off, they reach an altitude, they know it's safe to turn, and they'll ask TRACON, can we go make our right turn, or request an early right turn? And because we do not have an IGA for the for everything that TRACON does, they can say, no, we need you to hit the 4 miles, or they can say, yeah, traffic allows, then we'll let you turn. So it's up to the TRACON's discretion, what they would like to do. And remember, their primary goal is safety. So they're looking at those tubs, the radar scopes that they're sitting at. It's like a dungeon, pitch black with these scopes in front of them. And they concentrate on what they say moving tin. They have to make sure that the airplanes are separated, and they have to do whatever they have to do. And noise abatement is a nice thing, but that's not what's essential.
Are there not points that they do have to reach? I'm gonna ask you to go to maybe slide number 9, if we can, and maybe that will clarify back, I think. Can you go back one more? Oops, we skipped it. There. Do you see where it says DVT, SLD, and these locations like that? Are those not points where the traffic is basically supposed to have some
As I understand it,
instruction from?
DVT is Deer Valley.
Okay, that's the airports. All right, that's your airports.
And the others I'm not sure of, but I believe that's the same.
Okay. But there are points out there, waypoints that they have to go to. I was hoping we had a map of the waypoints. I couldn't read them. That they, besides the 4 DME, there are other locations and there are other flights. If
Okay,
they're
those
going to take off and they're going to go to, they're going to depart and they're going to go to Los Angeles or they're going to go to Texas, how do they know which path they have to follow? What's the guidelines?
Well, for the air carriers, they actually cheat a little bit. The dispatcher for the airline makes the flight plan, and they base it on fuel burn, winds, weather conditions. And when the captain comes to the counter, the gate agent hands them a printout that's about 900 pages, and it will have the flight plan and the estimated fuel at each place and so forth and so on, all the information that they could find handy. And that's their filed flight plan. That's been filed by dispatcher. The captain doesn't even file it. Military files their own, but the air carriers, they have it filed ahead of time. And that route would be what they would fly if all of a sudden they lost complete radio contact and they were in the weather and they would continue on that flight plan point by point until they reached their destination without any contact with anybody else. However, that hasn't happened in recent history because they have backup systems in navigation and in radio contact. So all of those points are there as a kind of a, what do you want to call it, a heritage backup. But in actual use, no. They can use that as a guideline. If we can go back to the IGA again, there are questions about departures over the river bottom and over houses and so forth. Well, the river bottom, when you look at it from the air, is really not that wide. And when you look at an aircraft over the river bottom, if you're on either one of the river banks, you can look up at it and see it and hear it, even though it might be directly over the river bottom. So you have to take that into account. And there's a question in here that says, why has a route been allowed to move outside of the river bottom? Well, the river bottom is good out to a certain point, but once the airplanes reach a certain altitude, they need to start heading where they're wanting to go. They're not all landing straight east somewhere, so they need to go wherever they're going. So the departure routes begin to spread out, begin to fan out. Let's take a look at the arrivals again. It said, or one of the questions says, why has there been a significant amount of air traffic over the past year and small planes flying over house to get to the airport? Well, Sky Harbor is a general use airport. So that means that if somebody has a small airplane and they file to go to that airport, they are permitted to go to that airport. And in the tower, I can tell you what we used to do sometimes is we'd have what's called a hub time or a bank when the airlines have chosen a particular time to bring their airplanes in as a big group. The process is called hub and spoke. You bring in all the flights, they all park at the gates, and the passengers all trade planes, and the airplanes all push out and all take off again. They're not exactly the same time, of course, but that's the general idea. So if a little airplane wants to get into Sky Harbor, they'll be pretty smart to pick a time that's not a bank time. And if that's the case, then they might be told by air traffic control, well, if you hurry, we can get you in. Otherwise, you'll have to hold, or you'll have to divert you to one of the peripheral airports. So sometimes they're directed by radar to a short final, and they may take a shortcut away from some of these arrival procedures. And the same thing is true of aircraft that are being in the holding patterns because of arriving during a bank. They have to sit and wait, and they'll get a hole in the slot where the airplanes are lined up coming down the arrival path, and they'll be told, okay, if you make a quick left turn, you can join the final approach. Why do smaller planes fly so low? Well, they have big airplanes flying above them. There's two ways that airplanes can avoid each other. They can avoid sideways, and they can avoid by direction, and they can avoid by altitude. And you really don't want the big airplanes flying low. So given the choice between who goes low, who goes high, better to have the big airplanes high and the little ones low. Anybody have any contributions they want to make while I take a look at this for a second?
Do you want to address the equalization between how many planes arrive and depart, east versus west?
Jordan, you've got that, don't you?
Jordan, you want to answer that? Thank you.
Sure. And maybe a specific follow-up question, but generally speaking, as I stated before, over the course of a year, it's averaged out, but there is some seasonality to it. So you'll see 60%, 65%, between February and September one way, and then it flips. The IGA, though, is more focused on the annual averaging. So at any given part of the season, you may feel like you're getting close to all of it, but it is the way the IGA is written.
And in actuality, it's very close to that.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
pretty-
sorry.
it's pretty close.
The annual average is always, within 55%, basically. So, yeah, it is very close.
I'm going to look for a slide here that shows S-turns, if I can find it. Nope, too far. Here's one. If you look at this slide, and you can see where the north runway is on the left side of the slide, and extending out a little bit to the right are the arrival paths, and you can see some red lines that do some zigzagging, or what they call S-turns. And that's compression management. Sometimes a controller who is doing the best they can will put somebody in behind somebody and they end up too close. Partly, if I may reveal a little secret here, the controllers will use airspeed as a way of managing traffic fit. And if they've got a guy on final that's doing, say, 150 knots, when they have an airplane they want to fit behind him, they'll give that airplane 145. And the one behind talks to the guy and says, well, we can do 150, and he won't notice. Well, as a matter of fact, what happens is he starts to close up and they get too close. So the controller will tell the guy in behind and say, well, you need to slow down some more or we won't be able to fit you in. And that's when they start making S-turns. Now, S-turns are annoying because they are deviating from the normal path, but the good thing about them is they get the airplane down so that you don't have him flying around even more. The second good thing is when they're making S-turns, they're trying to lose airspeed and they're trying to lose distance, so they don't have power applied. So an airplane making S-turns, the engines are at idle. You can still hear them, but they're not making lots of noise. There's a question in the number 3 area again about South Tempe, and it says, why are the runways not equalized? In other words, there are more departures from the center runway and arrivals to the north and south runways. And the answer to that is air traffic control can regulate departures very closely. If you've ever watched them out on the airport, they can have an elephant line, it's because they're nose to tail, for airplanes that are getting ready to take off. And the controller knows by the type of aircraft about what their climb speed is, and they know about how well they can get away from the airport traffic area. So they will try to get the slower airplanes out behind the faster airplanes when they can. And if they have a slow one that has to go first, then a faster one behind is given a little bit more space. But they can time them. And if you time them, they can be going off as quickly as 2 or 3 minutes apart. They can just really pump them out. Landing's a different story because the time on the runway is greater and the aircraft is touching down and then slowing to a speed that they can make a high-speed turnoff. And that consumes more time. And if an airplane is still on the runway, even if they're way down the runway, the airplane behind will probably have to make a go-around, and that is where they have to add a whole bunch of power, raise the nose up and climb out and go back and join the traffic pattern again. That's not only very expensive for everybody, but it adds traffic, especially over the north area and south area neighborhoods where the go-around pattern is. So the S-turn may look like a bad deal, but it happens, and it's a way to avoid an even worse deal.
And I would just add to that, the missed approach issue is something we are monitoring, and since our nav implementation in 15 and then the step 1 procedures a year ago and now the step 2 procedures, this is something we try to keep a close eye on because initially there was an uptick in missed approaches from the RNAV sequencing, which is obviously explainable. You're taking it from a very locked-in technology, and then as it gets closer to the airport, it becomes more and more human factor, and you do end up with a little bit more missed approach. At least initially, I would suspect that number, that rate goes down over the next couple of years, but we do monitor that.
It's true of any new system. People get used to it and learn how to work with it.
I have a question relating to the IGA compliance. I live over at Apache and Terrace, and I have, like I hear airplanes fly over, and it concerns departures, like all the time during the day. So if the airplanes are flying over where I live, are they compliant with the IGA?
I would have to see, for me, the particular flight paths, Jordan? Or,
I mean, again, I'm not totally familiar with the issue, but essentially, once they've flown over the 4DME, yeah, we're seeing it here.
This is before the 4DME, and the other question is, how come I don't see it in the maps? This like air traffic, this air path. Like if anyone can show me, like the flight path that it flies over, like Apache and because I don't see it, and but when I'm in my apartment, I hear it all the time. So I'm just a bit confused.
Bar, you have any thoughts on that?
I think you already addressed a little bit of that the the spread at 4DME is reduced, but the perception, if you live right in ASU Apache, it can appear that the aircraft is right over your head. When the tracks, when we get them, is a little bit further distance. It's like when you talked about the riverbed, from people that live along and file complaints, and I look at the flight tracks, usually it is because of the altitude and the distance to where you're standing. It appears, the aircraft appears to be in some area or straight above your head, even though it's right over, maybe right over the riverbed. So that is
The other
usually
issue,
playing in.
the other issue is that the airplanes, they fly very low. So I don't think I'm mistaken at this, but this is my experience, everyday experience with the air traffic.
Is the observation within the last year? I feel like they're lower or denser or south, more south than normal.
That's last year and this year.
Yeah.
This has been the pattern.
And
I'm gonna have to say, since we're taking questions from the audience, I guess we would probably defer this one to maybe our next meeting.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if this has, my question was if this situation complies with the IGA. If it's in compliance, then I don't have any issues. I just wanted to verify if this is the issue. So.
there's another phenomena that we're beginning to observe more and more. I noticed on layovers in New York City when I was in Manhattan, even though the airplanes could be as high as 10,000 feet over me, they were very vivid because everything was bouncing off of stone walls and concrete and asphalt and everything else. Whereas you get over Central Park, the noise is not so great. So as our city becomes more and more high-rise and condominiums and ASU buildings, the perceived sound is going to increase. However, there is a silver lining that I can bring up, and that is the jet engine manufacturers are making steps all the time. It's a continuous process. Every new version of jet engine that comes out is quieter than the one before. Now, there will be a point where you can't get it any quieter, I predict. There's going to be a certain amount of noise that you just cannot get rid of. But if you compare what the old water wagons used to do back in the late 50s, early 60s compared to the modern airplanes now, there's a really big contrast in noise. So we do have that going for us. I have a thought. It's not exactly in the question, format here. We've tried to generalize or give a summation of what these questions are, because we really don't have time to go through all of them. One of the things that I have found concerning is that we had the IGA for departures, but no agreement about arrivals. And it is a fact that when making a VFR arrival, the aircrew has the discretion of getting down to an MDA, a minimum descent altitude. And that might be as low as 2,000 or 3,000 feet over the valley coming into land. So they make a nice quiet descent, making the descent, and then when they get to a level off, now they have to add a bunch of power. And if they've got flaps down already, then that increases the amount of noise that they're making. And that's strictly an aircrew discretion in conjunction with what the TRACON allows them to do. And I have seen procedures done in other cities where they use ILS equipment that puts a glide slope out 35 miles or more out into the distance. And the aircraft are directed to join the glide slope out at whatever point they can intercept it. And then they follow it all the way down to the runway. And that allows them to not have big power changes as they're coming down. In fact, in Los Angeles, I can remember that we could pull the throttles back at San Bernardino and not push them up again until we touch down. So that's a thought. And that's about all I have in summation of what questions have been submitted.
I just do want to add that on our agenda was to do the IGA arrivals in South Tempe. There were 2 questions that we will get back to the audience on that are on departures. So we will get back to you on those. If we didn't answer them concisely enough in the general conversation.
What she means is after the meeting.
Well, I'm not sure if we're wrapping up here, but just so it's on the record, I am available to talk to Tempe residents whenever it's convenient for Tempe residents, whether it's departures or arrivals. My email's Jordan, JORDAN, .feld, FELD, @phoenix.gov. My direct line is 602-273-4072. And I'm happy to help or provide maps or have staff work on research. Please let me know.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Is there anything else from the commissioners up here that they would like to add? Okay, we'll like to thank all the people who submitted the questions. I'm being told it's over 100 people. Want to also thank everybody that came here out tonight. I know there's some faces out here I know, and we appreciate your support and hope that we can do more. We'll all be around here to answer any questions, but at this time, if there's nothing else, then we will close this. No, we're not going to vote.